Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith and right next to me is my lovely co-host, the Chattering Teacup.
Hello.
And here with us, crime and gothic thriller author Sarah Ward. Hello Sarah and welcome.
Hello, thank you.
It's wonderful to have you on our show because your very new book landed on our Kindle on the 6th of April this year.
Lovely.
And I have to say that your book's the reason I didn't get enough sleep last weekend.
Oh, really? Did you read it straight away? How lovely.
I did. It landed on my Kindle, like I said, and I started reading right away. So, Sarah, tell us about this new series of yours. It is based in Wales. The first book is called The Birthday Girl. What and why and how did you start? Why did you start this new series of yours? What was the reason why?
So my last book was called The Shadowing, and I wrote that as Rhiannon Ward. So it was one of my gothic thrillers. And I think I didn't have an idea really for another gothic thriller. I didn't know what period I wanted, what I wanted to write about. And I was really keen to go back to contemporary crime, which was the subject of my first 4 books. And my first 4 books were also a series. So I'd written, it was more or less a quartet. And then 2 standalones. And I thought, I actually really fancy doing a series again. But the thing is, when you start a new series, you're never entirely sure, how it's going to work out. So I wrote it in a way that it could be a standalone. And then as it sort of progressed, I thought actually my character, who's called Mallory Dawson, who's the sort of ex-detective who's on this island, I thought she'll actually really make a good series character. So I wanted to start a new series, and I wanted it to be set in somewhere I knew, but particularly I had an idea for a crime that takes place on an island. So that geographically narrows it down a bit. And I wanted it to be sort of semi-inhabited, this island, not sort of wild, just like one building on there. And the obvious place for me was Pembrokeshire, which is in southwest Wales. And it's got lovely islands, lots and lots of uninhabited islands. But there's this famous island called Caldy Island. And on it is a big, big monastery. I mean, huge monastery with outbuildings and everything. And when I was a child, I went across to visit it. And it frightened the life out of me because it had monks on it and everything. And I was really, really scared. But it's a really atmospheric place. And I thought somewhere like Caldy. So I very, very rarely use real life locations. I tend to draw my inspiration from real life locations, but I make them fictional because I find that I'd rather the plot led the narrative rather than the location. So I called it Eldie, so it's very similar to Caldy, but and it's a former convent on there, which has been changed into a hotel. So that was my idea, really. I just I actually, there were 2 things. First of all, I wanted to do a crime novel set on an island, and I had an idea for a poisoner because this is book 7. It's my 7th book I've written, and I've never written about poisons before. And I thought, now's the time to write about a poisoner.
Did you intend then to follow in the Queen of Crime's footsteps because she was very keen on poisons?
Yeah, well, actually, no. Although I do understand why it's called Christie-esque, because there's an island for a start, which she did in a couple of her books. And also, she was the queen of poisons because she was a chemist or chemist assistant or whatever. So she knew all about poisons and therefore used her knowledge in her crime novels. I think the idea for the poisoner came from, I read a book, just picked it up randomly. I saw it reviewed and I picked it up and it was about a poisoner called the teacup poisoner, actually. The teacup poisoner. His name was Graham Young. And in the 60s, he was a teenager. And he was obsessed by poisons and he was poisoning his family. He poisoned his mum, his dad, his sister, his classmates. He would just boil up these concoctions. And I think somebody died at that point. So he got sent to this very famous it's not prison actually. It's if you've got mental health issues. It's called Broadmoor in England. So he spent time in Broadmoor, and he was released, apparently rehabilitated, and then he poisons his employer. He gets a job and he poisons, and I think the employer dies. So he was just a complete obsessive. And I thought, God, this is really interesting, because I think the thing with killing, you know, when you're writing about killing and it's not your area of expertise in real life, you tend
we
to
take
think,
your word for it.
Yeah, exactly. You tend to think, why do people do it, really? And I think with this Graham Young, when I was reading, it was obviously it was obsessed. It was an absolute obsession to kill. And so that sparked my idea of teenage or she's preteen, my killer, when she first commits her first crime. But this idea that it's because it's an obsession, and I think that's what I tried to focus on in the book. Because funnily enough, I was talking about this the other night, because someone said, "Oh, it's a serial killer novel," and I never thought of it as a serial killer. I never thought of it, and yet my killer is definitely a serial killer, because she kills her schoolmates in the late 90s. And then she goes on this spree in this fictional island. But I never thought, I always think of serial killer novels as sort of Patricia Cornwell, that sort of type of writing. And I think because I was just really in the middle of her obsession, I forgot the fact that she was actually killing a lot of people. And so I think my publisher has written on the back, it's a serial killer novel. And I think, fair enough, you know.
Usually you think a serial killer is someone who kills one person after the other, but she actually did it at one event.
Yeah, when she was
so
young.
Is that actually a serial killer?
Yeah, because actually, and I also see serial killers as sort of, there's usually sort of kind of like a sexual element, or there's a sort of, there's no reason behind it other than, gratification. Whereas for Bryony, it's different. There's the second lot is the contemporary thing is revenge. The first lot is more, well, why do 12-year-olds, kill people? Because when I did a lot of reading around child killers, which then I didn't really use much in the book, because the whole book is set on this fictional island. But when I first started writing, it was the whole sort of lead up. So half the book was, everything that happens in the past, and then half of it was in the present. And then the way things go, I thought there was more tension if I just focused on the island. But I did a lot of reading about children who kill. And it's really, really interesting, because the age of responsibility in the UK is 10. So if you're older than 10, you can be charged as a killer. And it's clearly different in Europe. I mean, in Scandinavia, I mean, there are examples of child killers who are basically rehabilitated into society quite quickly. Whereas in this country, I mean, I don't know what it's like in Austria, but in this country, you're incarcerated in a prison. So in a sort of sort of juvenile prison, and then when you're 18 you go into the mainstream prison. I mean, it's and it's quite interesting how much you understand the idea of killing, really.
I think there's a case at the moment in England. I think it's a 12-year-old who's going to be on trial for murder in autumn or something like that. I read something in the paper, and they mentioned the 10, but he's already 12, and I think in Scotland they said it's 12 years.
I think in Austria you just said, I think you are right,
below
it's 14.
You're not
14.
You're considered a child.
Well,
I think
a
so.
10 it just seems.
Yeah, I think it seems somehow more scary if a child is killing with intent than an adult somehow.
Because
it seems more deranged somehow.
Yeah, because we always think, I suppose, of children as innocent, and they have this worldview that in a more positive way. But the way you describe her when you do your flashbacks is very scary. She's a very scary child, because
she knew what she was doing.
Yeah,
it wasn't an accident.
No, it was not an accident.
There's definitely. And I did draw the inspiration from Graham Young there, who really did, he was sort of, the poisons came above anything, any personal relationship. It was was all to do with the poison, really, which is interesting because there's lots and lots of things to talk about with poison. So it's traditionally known as a female crime. It's the women's choice of killing, and that comes from particularly the Victorian period, where a lot of women, I think it was because they got caught basically as forensics developed in the Victorian period, it became, you were able to test for arsenic poisoning, and a lot of female killers were actually then executed for killing, their husbands or whatever. And so it became known as a female sort of method of killing. What's interesting about poisoning is that if you're a killer, you can be a long way away from the crime by the time the person dies. Depending on how you do it. And the other thing is you can actually use stuff from your garden, because, for example, laurel, so the laurel hedge, which I mentioned in the book, I was reading up on people who've been clipping them, and then they put all their clippings in the car and they go to the dump to recycle it, and they pass out because all the odors from the hedge, are around the car. So there's lots and lots to sort of play with, really, around poison.
Yeah, because people forget about it or aren't aware what could happen.
Yeah.
I mean, plants are very sinister.
And is there maybe a connection with, in former times, women often being healers and knowing a lot about plants? And I mean, medicine and plant and poisons are two coins of two sides of one coin.
Exactly. Yeah. If you eat too much of lots of things, you can poison yourself. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is interesting.
It is. And also like the first sentence in your book. September is a good month to die.
Yeah. In fact, that whole first little section was one of the last things I wrote, because I thought Bryony needed to be on the page quite early.
Yeah.
And she wasn't for a while. And then it was like, let's get her up front, because the thing is with the birthday girl, as you've read it, but there's 3 suspects. It's not like there's lots and lots of different suspects. It could be Bryony, because the storm comes in and they're trapped on the island. It's 3 women who could be Bryony and Mallory, who, it's a famous case, becomes a famous case, this idea of the birthday girl. So she knows the story, but doesn't know the new name. Now she's been rehabilitated out into society. And so I may see Bryony is on the page quite early on as one of the 3 women, but you don't know. And so she doesn't make an appearance till right at the end, actually, as if this is Bryony. So I needed to do a really early on, so the readers got in mind, Bryony's going to the island. And then it's possibly 3 women. And then, towards the end, it's the reveal, really.
And I have to say, you've kept stringing me along, and I fell for it. Which
everyone.
Yes, indeed, I did. Which is proof again that I'm crap. I would be a crap detective. Yeah, because on the one hand, I thought, no, it can't be her. It can't be her. It's too obvious. No, it can't be. Yes, but she has to be. Who else could it be? Well. And what about Mallory? Mallory Dawson, she's a former Met detective, and she has been wounded. And where did the idea for her character come from?
So my first 4 books were police procedurals, so I did, quite a lot of research about the police, and I just didn't want to write a detective again, because there's been lots and lots of police changes, so I'd have to research all the, the sort of latest detecting stuff. There's been massive cuts in the UK in policing, so they rely on civilian investigators, so they recruit people into cases, civilians, often ex-coppers actually, who come back and work as civilian, and they've got all the powers of ordinary detectives except powers of arrest. They haven't got the power of arrest. And in fact, in future books, that's how Mallory is going to get involved in cases, because Mallory is the night manager in the Birthday Girl, so that's how she gets involved in trying to find out who the birthday girl is. But then I had to think, well, how else would she get involved in a series? Because Pembrokeshire's very rural and so on. It's like, it's going to be like Midsummer Murders, every time,
So you said Mallory is not a detective at the moment because of her being, can we reveal it? She was stabbed. on duty.
Yeah. So she's got she was stabbed in the chest and in the leg.
Yeah.
So, well, there were lots of reasons, really. I wanted a detective on the island, really, but I think if they were too connected to, sort of bureaucracy, they would probably find out the identity of Bryony sooner than Mallory is able to. I mean, now partly the communications go down because of the storm, but she's a civilian, but she knows how to solve crimes.
Yeah.
And so it gave her the sort of, she's got some legitimacy, but she's allowed to go off piste because she's trying to, she's not actually trying to solve who Bryony is. What she's trying to do is save everyone else, because it's clear that not just one person dies. It's because there's a head of steam being created. So she realizes that the easiest way to try and look after and save the other people is to find out which of the three women is Bryony. So I wanted her to have the skills to be able to do it, but at the same time not to have complete legitimacy because she's allowed to sort of do various things. But I think it's fair to say that Bryony is not just after revenge. She's she is targeting people, but she's obsessed by poison, so she's throwing a bit in the coffee and a bit to irritate people.
Too much coffee isn't good for you.
No.
Says, me. So you mean you're going to put poison in my coffee, are you? No? No, I hope not.
Otherwise I might start drinking my tea.
Be careful there.
So
I actually had food poisoning at one point when I was writing the book. It was about September last year. I ate some feta cheese and I think it'd just been in the fridge too long. I'd opened it and hadn't, eaten all of it. And I thought, that'll be all right. Oh my God, I was so ill with it. And then you're writing your book about a poisoner and it's like, I felt really awful. So that was added,
That's not the time you read you wrote the prologue.
No. The prologue was much later.
September, so no, who knows?
So is writing Mallory, she's an ex-detective, the best of both worlds. She's not an amateur sleuth and not a detective anymore. So
yeah, exactly. So I know I'm bringing her back for future books, obviously, and the use of civilian investigators is really helpful here because it's trying to find a way of inserting a civilian into murder cases. So in my future books, there's a detective who is on the mainland, Harry Evans, Harry with an I, spelt the Welsh way. And he makes an appearance towards the end of the book. And it's much more in book 2. Okay. So you do have a police, sort of detective in the novels, but Mallory is the person who's doing the bit of peace, really. So that's really helpful in terms of giving somebody a bit more freedom than you'd normally get as a detective.
And may I ask, your gothic self, did it look over your shoulder a little bit while writing this book? Because I got the impression, you didn't, Teacup, I know, but I got the impression a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think it did with the nuns, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
With the former convent, and there's this sort of building at the other end of the island where all the nuns are buried. Yeah. Not buried, they're in the sarcophagus and so on. And I thought that was a bit gothic, really. I mean, the thing is with my Rhiannon Ward books, there's the hint of the supernatural in both of them, really, and there's not in this one. I mean, there's not. No, there's not really any supernatural at all. But I think, in fact, I'm doing a talk tomorrow to the Dracula Society.
Yeah, I read that on your homepage.
And I was thinking about, I think I've always inserted a little bit of Gothic in my books. So my Derbyshire books, for example, where I live in the Peak District, there's lots of Industrial Revolution architecture. Now, the thing is with the Industrial Revolution, usually in this country, the architecture's made from like concrete and red brick, really grim. But in Derbyshire, which was the heart really of the Peak District, the heart of the Industrial Revolution, because of the mills, we had the mills and so on. But they were made out of the local Derbyshire stone, which is grit stone. So it's got like a cathedral type feel to it. but the stories are really grim. The mill stories are awful, children killing themselves because of the absolute terrible working conditions. And, I've used a lot of the Industrial Revolution architecture, like tunnels, old railway tunnels and old mills, and, use them in a Gothic way, really. So I think there's always been a bit of Gothic in when I'm writing contemporary crime, really, because it makes everything slightly darker, doesn't it, really?
Yes, indeed it does. And there were lots of stories about the nuns and what was going on.
Quite
and
mysterious in some way.
Exactly. What was true, what was not true. It felt a bit strange because it's often mentioned because one of the maids in the hotel, she said, I think I saw this figure and she was wearing this habit. And Mallory has to remind her, yep, but they are Anglican nuns, not Catholic nuns, dear. They weren't wearing, look at the picture, they are not wearing those black dresses.
I wonder, are nuns less scary than monks?
Well, there's a lot of, when you look at hauntings in the UK, the nun, there's plenty of nuns as well as monks, really. On Caldy Island, the real life island, they are Catholic monks. But I just wanted this idea. The thing was, after the First World War in the UK, there was a massive shortage of men, basically, because they'd all been slaughtered in the war. And so lots of women entered holy orders as well. Some Catholic, but, Anglicans as well. And they, created communities. So I just thought it worked quite well. I didn't really mind if they were Catholic or Anglican, really. But then if they were Anglican, they wouldn't be wearing, the windfalls, the Sound of Music type of thing. It's much more.
See, there we have it again, Sound of Music. The funny thing is.
It's also in the book.
Yeah, I know. But the funny thing is, I know not a single person in Austria who has ever seen the film.
Really?
We haven't. Friends of ours, I can't think of anyone who has ever watched the film.
We know about it, but
I know there are Sound of Music tours, for example, in Salzburg, but it's not the thing. The film is not the thing here in Austria.
Oh wow! Because my mum, it was in the 60s, and my mum loved it so much in the 60s. She went to see it about 8 times at the cinema when it first came out, and that's really, really common. It's like you've got this. I can't remember it now, but there's something in Germany where they sit down and watch every Christmas, and it's the one where it's a waiter and he's drunk.
Dinner for One.
Mm-hmm.
Dinner for One, yeah.
But that's what we
Christmas,
watch.
It's New
Year's Eve.
Yeah, no one's ever heard of it in this country.
See?
Never heard of it. And Dinner for One, when you say it's to German friends, well, obviously the same in Austria, it's like, we watch it. So Andy, my husband, and I, we sat down and watched it, and it's quite funny, but it's like, I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
Never heard of it.
Yeah. They broadcast it every year. Every year. It's the same thing, obviously.
Yeah, it's the same procedure every year.
Same procedure every year, Miss Sophie. Definitely, yes.
Have you seen it? Yeah.
Oh yes.
Okay.
What a one.
Because you switch on the TV for the dance and the sounds and so on, because what they broadcast as well, for example, in Austria, is the sound of the bell in St. Stephen's.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You have the waltz. After that, the Danube waltz, and before that you have the bell.
Okay.
A bit before you have Dinner for One.
And before that, the last thing they broadcast is Dinner for One. Yeah.
Funny, yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. It's a funny thing, actually. And I wanted also to ask you, did you do, besides the case you mentioned, which gave you the idea for the book, did you also research the psychology of child murderers?
Yes, I did. They're really hard reads, to be honest. So the 2 famous cases in this country are the Jamie Bulger killers. And so I reread one book that I'd read years and years ago. There was quite a famous non-fiction writer. I don't know if he was German or Austrian, called Gita Sireni. Do you know? Have you heard
Gita
of her?
Serini, yeah. I think I've heard the name before, yeah.
So she was based in the UK later in life, but
she was a psychologist or something, wasn't she?
Yeah, that's right. She wrote about Albert Speer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Speer
Yeah.
But she also was really interested in child killers. So she wrote a book about. Actually, she wrote two books actually. So the other famous one was someone called Mary Bell. So Mary Bell was in the 60s in Newcastle, and she poisoned some children. I think she poisoned them, but she did something to the children. And then she wrote a book about the Bulger killers as well. And she was pilloried in the press, actually. The press slated her because she tried to be fair. She tried to work out the reason behind. It's like she did it with Albert Speer, really, to try and work out what the motivation is. Yeah. But, not everybody wants, they just want to sort of, say this is, absolutely terrible, which it is terrible. I found it quite a hard read, really. I think I knew enough about child killers just to refresh my memory because, I don't think there's any particular insight you can give in a crime novel to why they do it, to be honest. I think you have to try and make it as believable as you can. But I don't think there's, it's not a psychological work, really. I don't know why children kill. I think it's a mixture of things because you say, they had a deprived childhood, or the parents and this and that. Yeah. That's true of lots and lots of people, and nothing ever happens. So I did do a little bit, but I was much more interested in researching the poison aspect, the island aspect. I really like the idea of a sort of fallen detective. So Mallory's injury gives her quite a bit of, it hinders her quite a bit, makes her very, very vulnerable. I was interested in that, on how injuries work and how you've got a really bad leg. Can you run down to the bottom of the bay and try and get help? That's much more interesting than trying to get inside the head of something that's just, really difficult to try and understand. But I did do a bit of reading because it would have been daft not to.
Yeah. I mean, Mallory is obviously our hero in this story. And you just said, can you run down the island during a storm? I mean, even if you're not injured, it would have been hard to run down to catch the people who wanted to get off or whatever is going on.
Just to get out of the house is dangerous in these circumstances.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. But she, it's sort of when, what it's like when you've had something happen to you, like you've had surgery or maybe you've, had an accident. It makes you much more fragile, doesn't it? I'm conscious of what your physical limitations are. And I think it's part of that is the tension is doing battle in that book because she really wants to solve the crime. And there's a physicality to having to deal with the murder. There's a physicality to being in the crime scene, when she opens the hotel bedroom door and spots it, all policing, that it's quite a physical thing. And so she's really, I think, really aware that she's not quite up to, she's not fighting fit, really. And
I find it quite nice that the detective is an antagonistic because she's invading his turf.
Yes.
For a change, because usually they are, what are you doing? This is my responsibility, and how dare you? But he's, okay, we can use your help. Great.
Well, she's the only person in situ, isn't she? Really? Sort of the main person who's in a position to actually do something about it. Really.
So I guess he's happy. He doesn't have to do it.
These things can be career killers, can't they, really? So, the police are going to be really concerned about their careers. It's like we had a case here recently, I don't know if it was in the in the news over with you, about a woman who fell into the river. And her name was Nicola Bulley. And the police came under massive scrutiny because they didn't find her body for about 2 weeks, and they were searching all the river, and then they had these experts in and so on. And I think the police involved there honestly thought that their career was over. I think so. These high profile cases can be really, really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And may I ask you a little bit more about your gothic thrillers, if I may, because the one I read, The Quickening, I mean, it takes place on 2 timelines.
Yeah.
And that's what I found very interesting. And like you said before, your Gothic ones are, of course, creepy. It was creepy. And what I found wonderful in this book was that, because I've read something or Gothic thriller before, which left me a bit unsatisfied, whereas yours didn't leave me at all unsatisfied. It was wonderful, and I absolutely enjoyed it. I mean, the appeal for Gothic thrillers, where did that come from?
What's funny is when I wrote The Quickening, I thought I was writing a ghost story, because that's what I wanted to write. I wanted to write a ghost story. So when I was growing up, I used to read loads and loads of detectives. So that's what put me onto writing crime, loads and loads of crime thrillers. But alongside that, I was always reading ghost stories. And my mother, my Welsh mother, was always telling ghost stories as well, dark and all. and you put the fire on and tell a ghost story. And so I thought, I'd quite like to write one. So The Quickening was written as a ghost story. But the whole Gothic is having a massive revival here. I think around the world, basically. And the reason for that, I'm not entirely sure, because partly it's a publishing thing, isn't it, really? Publishers are branding everything Gothic, even domestic noir, with this sort of psychological thrillers. There's this sort of, they're being called Gothic. Historical ghost stories are being called Gothic, which is great. But also, I think, the thing is, Angela Carter in 1974 said we're living in Gothic times. But I think we are living in Gothic times now, because, Gothic's concerned with truth versus untruth, good versus evil. We've had post-Brexit woes. We've got post-pandemic woes, long COVID, politicians who we don't trust, fake news. In this country, all the institutions like the police, the fire service, institutional racism, institutional sexism. So we feel, it feels like we're living in Gothic times. So I think that's partly the popularity as well. Although maybe that's going a bit too deep. Maybe it's just we like a bit of darkness. The worst thing I'm ever asked in an interview is not yourselves. I mean, occasionally I go on radio or local radio or whatever, and when they ask me, why do so many women read crime fiction? It's like the question I don't know is the main answer. I think women read more fiction than men anyway.
Yeah.
So therefore they read more crime fiction than anything. Yeah. But all I can usually come up with is that I think women are drawn to dark narratives, which partly reflect their experiences, because, women have experiences of, the whole Me Too movement and feeling under threat and so on. And we can be drawn to reading about these in a safer environment, because it's crime fiction. It's going to get solved in the end. And I think that's true of Gothic as well, maybe. So maybe it's not to do with Brexit and post-COVID. Maybe it's just we like a dark narrative that's, But the thing is with Gothic, unlike crime fiction, it doesn't have to be neatly solved, because that's what I really found about The Quickening and The Shadowing, my 2 Gothic books, is unlike crime fiction where I need to tie everything up together, otherwise the reader will email me, or worse, write a review on Amazon saying, oh, you didn't tie this up. Whereas in Gothic you can leave it a bit more open, because is there such thing as ghosts, or isn't there?
True.
You can't prove it either way, so you can leave things a little bit more ambiguous. But I think the process is the same, that we go a little bit into darkness, really, or we go more into darkness when it's Gothic, really.
And does it make it even more creepier if children are involved?
Yeah, it's really funny, because I read. So I'm a judge on the Dagger, one of the daggers called the Crime Fiction in Translation Dagger. So I've read a lot of translated crime fiction this year. From all over the world, Korea, China, Scandi, all around the world. I think about a third of them involve the death of a child. People say to me, "Oh, it's always women who get killed." In crime fiction, it's not. It's not. If there is a predominantly profile of a victim, it's usually a child. And it's made me a lot more aware of, children, how they're portrayed, and, can be an easy victim to portray in crime fiction. Now, I was reading all these crime fiction and translated books, knowing that my child killer kills loads of kids. Do you know what I mean? And, so, and the book I've just written involves the death of a child, although it was just an accident, and it's to do with the modern day, the contemporary impact of that. But so I'm really conscious that I'm contributing to this sort of writing about children who have died, and you mentioning the quickening because there's the death of a child. I just think sometimes, I think partly the reason is that for a novel to have emotional impact, you have to care about the victim. And if you're going to get a tattooed biker fished from a canal, you've got to work quite hard to make, to make people care. Nothing against tattooed bikers. It's just, you've got to, because I deliberately on my second book had a male victim because I wanted to work with, trying to make my readers care about finding out who killed him. But I think sometimes, if it's to do with a child or a vulnerable person, then it is, it is slightly easier to get your readership invested. Whereas, the death of a politician, people are like, harder to care.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Someone cheer.
Exactly.
And
absolutely.
I just thought maybe if more children are killed in books nowadays, might it have to do with the pandemic and being locked in your houses with your children?
I don't know. I don't know if it's I think maybe when you read something, so I read about 50 books. I think when you read that closely, you're going to notice the trends, aren't you? I think if I hadn't read quite so much in a short period of time, the trouble is with crime fiction is sometimes it's hard to do anything new with narratives. And it's like trying to find a new way of dealing with the death of a child or something. But in terms of the quickening, the reason the whole book's about loss really and grief. So my main character Louisa is she's a widow who's remarried very quickly, and she lost her children in the Spanish flu epidemic. And so it's all about loss, and the fact she thinks she might be seeing a child is to do with loss and so on, as much as the child being just an easy way of getting your readers to sort of empathize, really.
And I also think in this case it's not supposed to be that you survive your children. So when someone loses them due to an illness or to an accident, it's somehow unnatural, and it's felt more than if, let's say, old people die, because you expect them at one point to die. So there's more shock.
It is. And I was trying to put when you're writing crime fiction anyway, you're always trying to put your characters through the ringer, because that's the whole point of, sort of increasing tension and so on. But with Louisa, I wanted the reader, it was the only book I've written in the first person. It was so you could get inside her head and you can decide, and she's pregnant in this book. Is she seeing this child because she's pregnant and grieving and overworked and she doesn't love her husband? Or is there a ghost? Is there actually a ghost? So it was, lots and lots of things to layer on, because women are often disbelieved. Their experiences are disbelieved because, especially in that period, because they've got a fit of the vapors, or they're pregnant or whatever. Whereas most pregnant women just get on with their lives, and they're not hallucinating something.
Like you just said, especially in those times. I mean, it's shortly after the First World War. And people had different expectations, especially of married women. Yeah,
completely. So, you were, even about 30 years ago in this country, no, maybe not 30 years, because I always think 30 years ago, ages ago, but that's 30 years ago is only 1993, so forget that. But in the sort of 60s, you were still expected to give up work when you got married or had a baby.
Until the 70s in Austria, women had to get the okay from the husbands, in essence, to work.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't done often, but legally, the husband could say,
no,
you're not allowed to work.
Yeah. So we only had the Equal Opportunities Act in 1976 here, so 1977. So you couldn't get a mortgage without your husband's permission and things like that.
Yeah. Strange. And may I also ask, is your room bigger on the inside?
No, this is Doctor Who references.
Yeah, because I read you've written 2 audio dramas for Doctor Who.
Yeah.
So it's not just gothic and crime.
Well, I like Doctor Who, and I do really, really like speculative fiction anyway. So this book I was recommending, this Black Lake by Guy Morpus, who I'm interviewing at Crime Fest. It's a speculative fiction. It's set in 2045, I think, so near future. But I like anything with a bit of time slip. I love Dark, the Netflix series Dark. Have you seen that? It's a German TV series.
Heard about it, but haven't seen it.
Okay.
That's again like a time slip sort of futuristic thing. So I love Doctor Who. Do you watch it, Doctor Who? Have you heard of it? Yeah.
Watched it.
Not the old ones, but the new ones.
Yeah.
So my husband's a big fan as well.
Yeah,
so.
I'm very partial to David Tennant. So.
Oh, are you? You like David Tennant? Yeah. Doctor Who is part of all our childhood. So my nephews are David Tennant, but me, there was a doctor called Tom Baker.
Yeah, I know Tom Baker.
And he was the my childhood doctor, and he used to absolutely terrify me, and the Daleks and everything. It's part of my childhood.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, the ideas in sci-fi give you more opportunities, do you think, to explore different tropes or themes than if it's set in the present?
Maybe more freely than if you set it in the present?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed doing the Doctor Who, but the Doctor Who was very much in a framework of an existing TV series, so I didn't have to do too much of my own work in terms of, I had to think of plots and so on, but all the characters are effectively there. I don't think I'd feel confident about writing a sci-fi novel or something completely original, because the thing is with crime fiction, because I've read it all my life, I kind of know what's out there, even if I don't really, even if there's an author like, who haven't I read? I don't know, say Michael Connolly. I've never read him, but I kind of know the genre he's writing in, what to expect. Whereas sci-fi, I wouldn't know where to start. I have no idea what's been done, what hasn't been done, what's original, what's not original. With ghost stories, I've read enough ghost stories to know what's hackneyed, what's a bit, a bit of a cliche and what's not. But with sci-fi, I just wouldn't know. So I love reading them, but I can pick them up, put them down, and it doesn't really matter, that I don't know huge amounts. I actually did I think it was like Horror Fest or something when The Quickening came out, and it was really unusual for me because I feel very comfortable in crime fiction events and stuff because I just know enough. Whereas they were talking, the panel was talking about all those, and I thought, I've never heard of any of these. So it's like, no.
And as to the audio dramas, what were the different challenges writing an audio drama compared to a novel?
I think you can be a bit sort of fall into the trap to think audio dramas is just about dialogue, and it's not. I think that was my main lesson, really. It's not just about, writing a novel. You do dialogue and you do description, and it wasn't just writing dialogue. I really had to think of a listener, because when you're writing something for the page, you can just describe the building and the scenery and so on. Whereas, how do you do it in an easy way? Because you don't want the character saying, oh, look at that grey house with, the red roof and so on. That's ridiculous. So you have to try and find a way of weaving in descriptions. You can use the special effects as well, like the sound of, thunder or whatever. But that's what I found really interesting, is making it a story for the ears, which is different from writing a novel. But I enjoyed it. Storytelling is storytelling, so there needs to be a narrative arc and lots of drama and so on. So I think crime novelists naturally do that. We have to keep the tension going. So I think a lot of crime writers who've done audio dramas, they usually transition quite well because it's, that keeping that tension going. But it is a completely different genre. I've only written the two. I've been doing some script work for some non-fiction stuff, but it's an interesting sort of experience, really. And it's also a different process because it's a lot more collaborative. You have lots and lots of input, whereas I can write a whole novel and then I send it off to my agent and I send it off to my editor. But the whole thing's finished by then. And even if they rip it apart and they want lots of doing, it's still everything I've done and I do that. Whereas with an audio, it's someone wants this and someone wants that. And, it's a lot more collaborative, really.
Yeah. And when you work on a novel, are you a planner?
So I'm a bit of a mixture, really. My first 4 books, no. I was a pantster. I had a premise and I just kept going. When The Quickening was completely planned, because I changed publishers and they obviously wanted the ending. And also when you're writing about the supernatural, you really need to try and think, how is this going to resolve itself? So my 2 Gothics were plotted. Not meticulously, but, I give myself enough room to sort of mess around in the middle. But generally, I knew what I was doing. For The Birthday Girl, I think I've hybrided the 2 now. So I kind of knew the beginning, kind of knew the end. I didn't know which of the 3 was going to be the killer until quite late on. I decided that was really important because I needed to work it out myself. And some of the things, I can't give anything away. But the bit, I tell you what, I can give us enough that for those who've read it, that when Grace recognises that Grace is the first victim, she dies quite early on, I can say that. When Grace recognises Bryony, it's because of something. And when that clicked into place, I thought that makes them the killer, definitely. And so that sort of really clarified things for me in terms of, so I was a sort of hybrid plotter. I did quite a lot of free writing, but I did sort of have in my mind, one of these has got to be Bryony and it really needs to work out.
So sorry to interrupt you there. So Grace, when she recognizes Bryony, and
so Grace,
I know what happened.
It didn't work out what she recognized or who she recognized.
I do, and it was very interesting. It was until it was revealed for the reader. But I find it very interesting what you just said. So you had your victim or your witness to realize before you yourself.
Not so much that. I was looking for a way that Grace recognises Bryony, because the ordinary way would be that it says, because people change between the age of 12 what they're looking like now and 30. So for a long time it was like she walks into dinner, she looks at Bryony and thinks, oh, that's my child's thing. But that's actually not what happens.
Yeah, I know.
And what actually happens, when I realised that could work, that's when I decided that she would be the killer.
It was also the perfect explanation.
Yeah,
I have to say. Absolutely.
It was a clever way.
Yeah, absolutely clever.
Thank you.
Yep. Sarah, what would be your advice for any other aspiring crime fiction author out there?
So I think endings are quite hard in crime fiction. I think writing endings are really hard because even in reading crime fiction, we often get a bit disappointed by the endings. And so my advice is always try and finish what you start, which is really hard to do because we know lots and lots of people have started novels and just don't finish. But my very first book I ever wrote, I finished it. And at the end of it, I thought, I can do much better than this. But actually, finishing it the first time made finishing it the second time, and that second time was the book that became In Bitter Chill, my first novel. I learned so much from actually trying to finish a book from my first one that's still in my drawer. I wouldn't get it out. I don't think it's very good. So my advice is always try and finish it. If it's absolutely terrible, I totally understand. But if you're halfway through and you're thinking, oh, I've got a better idea, because we've always got a better idea when we're halfway through. It's just like get the ending down. Try and work out how to tie all those endings together, and then you'll learn. Even if you don't, do anything with the novel, you think I've got a much better idea. You'll learn how to, because that's what we've all got to do. It's always really exciting starting it because you're putting this in, and you're putting that in, and you're explaining it, and you're creating atmosphere. halfway through the book, you think, I've got to actually try and make, these things come together. And that's the really, really hard bit. That's the slog. When authors are on Twitter, they're always about the 30,000, 40,000 point. And it's like, I don't know what to do now, because once you get to 60,000, it's much, much easier. You're on the downward, the end is in sight.
And do you have to follow certain rules? Because that's quite a bit what you hear from authors and what I've read so far, the rules of writing crime fiction.
I do try. I try and follow some rules. So, for example, I try and keep one point of view per chapter. I really admire people who don't do that. So on Tuesday night, I interviewed Mick Herron, who writes the Slow Horses spy team series. The novels that have been made into a TV series, and he has multiple points of view in a chapter, and I absolutely love them. Love his books. So I like people who break the rules. But I find the stronger your structure, the easier you can make things quite complicated. Because, if you know where you are in the novel, which person is speaking and so on. So I kind of try and follow the rules. And I certainly try and, make sure everything's explained at the end, and I like to have, to a certain extent, not in all my books, but, some kind of restoration of justice, or, some kind of, somebody has died. And I do like to try and find, make sure that the killer comes to some kind of justice. Yeah.
Yep.
I just remembered one question. In the book, The Perfect Girl, you sometimes, more than one chapter, start with the same line.
Yeah.
And we weren't sure, is it that it sets the timeline, the next chapter that starts with a sentence, happens at the same time, or is it just to emphasize what is said in there?
Yeah, it was just to emphasize it's one of those three, because you eventually work out it's one of those three, but right early on, there's a lot of characters being introduced, isn't there? Because it's a hotel, and I've got a guest list at the front of the book. There's quite a lot of characters. So I wanted the reader to think, I've just read that line, so why is it? Because I put the three women together, the chapters for the three women together. So the first time you meet it, you think, why is there three chapters all beginning with the same line? And then you see it again that happens about 4 times in the book. And so it was just, the device really was to help early on to think it's one of these three women, because the plot's gradually unfolding, isn't it, really? It's not happening at the same time.
Okay, that was my idea. Yeah, good. Okay.
So it's actually a short span of time, but it feels much longer because so much is happening.
Yeah, exactly.
I couldn't drag it on, too long, because you don't have that storms that big. They're normally about 48 hours, 72 hours. Eventually help's going to come. Yeah. So it all happened quite quickly.
Yeah, that's true. Because it's not an avalanche. They have to dig through. So yeah, absolutely. And you touched a little bit about what's coming next. What can you tell us about your plans in your writing?
So I've got so my second book is written. I've handed it in. I'm waiting for my editor's comments, so I won't say too much about it in case it changes quite considerably. But it's set in Pembrokeshire. Now we've got a really, really beautiful place called St David's. It's got a big cathedral right by the sea, and it's the smallest city in England because it's got a cathedral. It's called a city, but there's only about 600 houses there. I mean, it's absolutely tiny, but it's called a city. Really beautiful. And it involves, now I've got 6 suspects in this, and it involves a child died about 10 years earlier, and the mother of the child is found killed. It's found dead, not sure if she's killed, and the 6 people who were in the house when the child went missing all lied. And it's provisionally called The Sixth Lie. I don't know if that title will stay, but I like it because it's who told the sixth lie, which is the important lie.
I see. And Sarah, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
No, I don't think so. I should have thought about that. I don't think so. Except, if you come to the UK, try and go to some of our brilliant festivals, because I know you two are coming to Crime Fest, but there's some really, really great crime writing.
Yeah, I know. You will be at Crime Cymru next
week.
Yeah,
In Aberystwyth.
Yep.
So that'll be fun. I haven't been to Aberystwyth for ages, and then I'll be at Crime Fest in May.
Yeah, we saw that. We're looking forward to it as well. We've booked the hotel, we've booked the flight, so we are coming.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. So we're coming on Wednesday, a bit early.
Oh, brilliant.
Just to be safe regarding any problems.
Travel problems.
That way.
Who knows? Yeah. Exactly.
Bit uncertain times regarding traveling at the moment.
Yeah. Is that because of the strikes, or is it just COVID?
No, COVID is I think
strikes
no
and personnel problems and so on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. COVID is no longer, I think, a concern. Well, not here in Austria, not anymore, and I think in the UK. No. Well, we're looking forward to it.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And you will chair a panel. You will be.
I'm on a panel, and then I'm, which is about the supernatural in crime fiction. So I don't know if I'll be talking about The Birthday Girl or my gothic thrillers. And then I'm chairing a panel on locked room mysteries and sort of closed settings.
Yeah, not just like The Birthday Girl. It's a different kind of locked room mystery, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly like the closed setting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Teacup. More questions for our guest? Nope. So Sarah
sounds promising.
Absolutely. And thank you for The Birthday Girl for writing the book. It was really wonderful to read it.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for reading it. And thank you for all your enthusiasm. It's been lovely, to hear, sort of really great questions.
It was a pleasure reading it and having you on our show as well. So thank you very much for joining us and for making it possible.
Thank you very much. No, that's great. Have a lovely weekend.
You did enjoy this episode as much as we did? Then hit subscribe and don't miss the next episode. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. If you like to support us and buy us a coffee, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee and other platforms. You can find all the necessary links in the description. Until next time.